Ancient people typically had a different view of the past than what most of us modern folk have become accustomed to when we think of prehistoric history. The ancients viewed the past as a better time for humanity, as opposed to what most of us are taught in school these days about prehistory, which paints a picture of a more harsh lifestyle than the lifestyle we have become accustomed to in the modern world. People had to hunt and gather food, and depending on the era you're looking at, they might have farmed. There's other variances depending on the era and location you're looking at. Some people might have lived in caves, others in rudimentary huts or tents. Others might have just lived out in the wilderness in various different weather conditions, which might have been extremely hot or cold depending on where they were. But regardless of what prehistoric era you're looking at, there isn't evidence of any modern comforts like we have with indoor heating and air conditioning, news and entertainment at our fingertips, and fast ways to travel like cars and airplanes. So the picture we've been painted of the prehistoric past looks like a time of harsh living conditions, far removed from our modern lifestyles. But the ancients didn't view it exactly like that. The ancients didn't have our modern comforts either. They viewed the time of comfort and harmony as being in the past. More specifically, the distant past, because ancient people had myths of earlier ages. Greeks and Romans viewed the past as various ages that gradually declined in each successive age, with the first age being called the Golden Age, a time when humans were first created and lived and mingled among the gods and lived long lives where they remained youthful and the world provided food for them in abundance. The Golden Age was followed by the Silver Age, where humans lived shorter lives and quarreled among themselves. Silver Age is followed by the Bronze Age, Heroic Age, and Iron Age in the Greek version of the myth. The Roman version is similar but omits the Heroic Age. I won't be delving too deeply into the various myths here, but the Golden Age myth is a topic I discussed in my first video on this channel. If you're interested in that, I might link it at the end of this video, or you can look it up on my channel. Though the version of the video in my channel listing won't show as the first one because the one out there now is a remake of the original I did a while back after I had a little bit more experience with recording and editing, so the original version is unlisted now. What I want to talk about today isn't so much about how the ancients thought the past had a golden age, but more about how they viewed the past as being broken up into different ages. It isn't just a Greek and Roman myth. In the Americas, the Aztecs also broke up human history into 5 ages, which they called the 5 suns. Hindus also have 4 ages separated into epochs of times called yugas. Ancient Persia had Zoroastrianism, which also describes multiple ages, and though we don't typically break down the Old Testament into ages, in the context of comparing it against the myths of these other cultures, I'd say the Great Flood of Noah was the end of one age and beginning of a new one. Also, I don't think this is that commonly known, but Jewish tradition says there were earlier ages that God created and destroyed before the age of Adam. Modern Judaism doesn't just read what we call the Old Testament now, but they have other texts as well, called the Talmud and Midrash. I don't know if it's considered canon or a common belief among modern followers of Judaism, or if there's any variation among the various modern sects like Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, or Reform Judaism. But the text I'm referring to can be read in Louis Ginsberg's book, The Legends of the Jews, which I think was using the Midrash text Genesis Rabbah chapter 3 as the source. This is what it says. Nor is this world inhabited by man, the first of things, earthly created by God. He made several worlds before ours, but he destroyed them all because he was pleased with none until he created ours. But even this last world would have had no permanence if God had executed his original plan of ruling it according to the principle of strict justice. It was only when he saw that justice by itself would undermine the world that he associated mercy with justice and made them to rule jointly. Thus from the beginning of all things prevailed divine goodness, without which nothing could have continued to exist. So, with all that in mind, what I got to thinking about is, what if there's something more to all these ancient beliefs about the past being broken up into multiple ages? Something that has been mostly lost upon us in the modern era after the anthropologists and paleontologists reworked prehistory into a different set of eras that really don't resemble the earlier ages the ancients described. What I'm thinking about today, which isn't really a belief per se, but more like one of my thought experiments, where I just consider an idea even though I'm not sure if it's true. What I'm thinking about today, some would probably classify as alternative history at best, or pseudo-history at worst, because it's somewhere in between the current academic timeline of prehistory at one end and young Earth creationism at the other end. And by the way, the young Earth creationism movement of today, I'd say, is largely a movement that developed as a response to the changing academic views of prehistory in the 1800s and 1900s, as historically there wasn't a clear consensus on how long prehistory was in the early or medieval Christian churches. But that's a whole other topic that I talk about in a different video, which I might also link at the end of this one. Back on point, my thought today is, what if the various layers of fossils archaeologists and paleontologists have dug up over the years aren't necessarily just representations of gradual change and evolution, but of different ages of creations that had already been destroyed? The academic scientists have long pushed the theory of evolution as why people and animals have changed over time, but they've never actually been able to make that theory work. There are no intermediate species or missing links between us and earlier archaic forms of hominids. It's like they keep expecting to find an intermediate species one day, but they never do. And I doubt they ever will, because I don't think a missing link species actually exists. What I think they might be finding when they dig up the really old fossils from prehistory are from earlier creations. And for whatever reason, those earlier creations have been destroyed. If so, then there is no direct link between us and them. We were just created later. We might be similar to them, but that doesn't mean we're directly related to them. It would just mean we're just created in a similar form. And I don't think that's far-fetched. Just look up the Cambrian explosion, for example. It's the time in the fossil record where complex life forms suddenly appear. It's a mystery to the scientists how complex life forms just suddenly appear. Not a mystery to me. I just assume that's when those types of life forms were first created and placed here. The academic scientists think everything just evolved from that point into the life forms we have today, but I don't think so. It might just stand out because it's the first time complex life forms were created here. Later animals and hominids in the fossil record weren't necessarily evolved from those originals, but just subsequent creation periods. And the stories the ancients told were about earlier ages of humans, or perhaps human-like people, which doesn't necessarily preclude there being even earlier ages of time with no human-like population living on it. The dinosaur age might be an age unto itself, an age that was destroyed and the dinosaur template not used again. Well, except for alligators. The alligators seem to keep coming back. Which might also explain why some animals appear to evolve over time while others don't. Like the old adage, if humans evolved from apes, then why are there still apes? It's because nothing really evolves into something else over time. It's because they are created at different times, sometimes with minor changes. So what do you think? Are the various fossil layers actually the remains of earlier, separate creations? It's an idea I've considered, but not a belief of mine. Perhaps in time it'll become a belief, or perhaps I'll decide the whole idea is rubbish. I don't know, we'll see. It's hard for me to even imagine what potential new information could even convince me 100% either way, though, barring receiving some direct message from God confirming or denying it. But that's okay. Ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, I don't know that it's really important to know if the fossil record is earlier creations or not. It's more of an idle curiosity. But what do you think? Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.